We are live with the virtual truck series from Fire Nuggets, doing a webinar series. October 2020, we're doing the virtual truck. Welcome everybody. My name is Joe Schuler. I'm a board director for Fire Nuggets. And today we have the pleasure of a couple of our best from Irons and Ladders, Brian Lynch and John Roy. So we're just going to get straight to it. They'll introduce themselves. And if you first time Zoom members or any questions regarding it, we're still trying to figure it out too. So we're all in it together. There's a Q&A or the chat section on your Zoom at the bottom, on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Just go in there. And if you have any questions for the guys as we go through,
lock up.
We're off on the right foot.
Yeah, everything's going well.
Uh-oh.
There we go. Coming back, maybe. You there, Joe?
You there, Joe?
back. You guys on?
Yep, we can hear you now. We just can't see you.
We can hear you, can't see you. You're frozen. It's working out well.
Well, should we get going then?
Yeah.
Apparently
Sorry.
you can hear us, according to somebody else who's watching. So
Yeah.
I guess we'll probably get
Okay.
rolling here.
We'll just get started. Sorry, there's a little glitch there. It looked like everything was frozen. So thought there was a technological problem. Obviously, we're not technologically savvy. So we'll get started. My name is Brian Lynch. This is John Roy from Irons and Ladders. And we're going to go through the, well, there you are, Joe. You rejoined us there. You were frozen for a while. We're going to go through this presentation with you tonight on door size up, talk some forcible entries. So before we get started, I just want to thank Jeff Bryant from Fire Nuggets for really putting this together. And it's obviously, we live in interesting times right now, difficult times to get out and train. Conferences, classes are getting canceled and postponed, rescheduled. So to still provide a platform for us to go out and train and I guess network with one another and talk fire stuff and keep us all engaged, certainly appreciate it. So having said that, we'll get into this presentation, and this presentation is really designed to be part of our full day forcible entry class. And what we'll do is, anybody who's taken our class knows we come in the morning. We have a morning classroom session where we discuss basically door size up, and really what we're trying to do is lay the foundation for recognizing what we're up against with forcible entry, recognizing the characteristics of the door, what it's made of, how it swings, the primary lock, secondary lock, and by doing that, we recognize the easiest and fastest way for us to get in. If we know how the door is locked, know how it's secure, we're going to have a really good idea about how it's going to fail, right? So we do that in the morning, and then the afternoon we go out and we do a full day or a half day, I guess, forcible entry stuff, 1-man, 2-man, inward swinging, outward swinging doors, commercial, residential, garage door cuts through the lock, right? So obviously we're not going to be doing the second half of that. It'll just be this classroom. So we've added a couple little videos just to kind of demonstrate some of the things that we're looking for. So having said that, the way this all started, and there's a story that we tell at the beginning of our forcible entry class that is really kind of represents it's really the story of the fire that started Irons and Ladders, and it's, to me, really represents and is poignant for understanding that forcible entry can set the tone for your fireground, right? And this is I'm going to be telling this story in third person. I don't normally tell this. This is other guys in our class tells this story, but because he was on it. But this fire happened probably 13 years ago, 12 years ago, right? And the area in our city where this fire was, the first due engine company and the second due engine company, they had a pretty quick run into that area, like 2.5 minutes to get to that area, right? They were on top of it pretty quickly, and it was usually a race to see who was going to be first or second due to that area. They usually arrive within 30 seconds, 45 seconds of one another. So this fire gets dispatched. The first due engine company gets on scene, calls a working fire, and culturally in everybody's organization, you know the way that fires sound on the radio. You're used to hearing the same things, the same nomenclature, the same verbiage being used to describe what they're seeing and what we're doing about it. And this fire was really no different to begin with. You started to hear that stuff from the first engine company, but this fire was located in an area in our city that was kind of like a no man's land for truck companies. It's probably about the longest run you're going to get in the middle of our city. 7 or 8 minutes for the first due truck company to get on scene. So as they're responding in, they hear the first engine company get on scene, and then they've got about a 5-minute run until they get there. And during that 5 minutes, there's really not the normal fireground cadence that we're used to hearing, that we've kind of become accustomed to. It's kind of radio silence, right? So when this truck company pulls onto the street, there's smoke blowing across the avenue, across the street. Clearly the fire's still burning. They pull up in front of the street and they see for the first time why there's really no radio traffic and why everything is seemingly stopped on the fireground. And they get their first look at the building. At the front of this building, there's 2 engine companies worth of firefighters standing on the front stoop of this house, front porch of this house. One pretty senior guy is mule kicking at the door, trying to get behind the door. There's another guy who's got an axe and he's chopping at the middle of the door, trying to get in. There's a probationary firefighter who's standing down off the porch, and they've got the tool in their hand. They got the Halligan in their hand, but they're just kind of flipping it, kind of, doing I call it the baton twirl, like the girl at the front of the parade with the, throws it in the air, just twirling it in the air because they got the right tool, but they don't really know kind of how to use it, right? And they certainly aren't going to bump the senior guys off that porch. So the Irons firefighter on the truck company, and the Irons firefighter is the guy that rides directly behind the company officer on a truck. Their responsibility is force entry into the building and then search, right? So they get off, they recognize they've got an entry problem. They get off, grab their tools, makes a beeline across that front yard to try and get into that, start forcing entry into that building. And about that time, they get that door finally kicked open after like 5 minutes of mule kicking and chopping on it. So they mask up, go inside, and about 10 feet inside that front door, they find a lady. They bring her outside. She's got a heart rhythm. She's not breathing on her own anymore. And so they start resuscitative efforts on her and send her to the hospital. And unfortunately, she dies. She succumbs to her injuries, right? So, the best way that this is put, I can say, is that it's really hard to say that like my fire department killed somebody, right? Because I don't know all the variables that happened. I don't know, maybe she had a heart attack beforehand. That's how the fire started and left something on the stove. Who knows? There's all sorts of different variables that we can't account for that we'll probably never know now, right? But I can say without any reservation that when my fire department showed up that day, we didn't give her her best chance to survive. And we didn't live up to and meet the expectation that she probably had for her fire department, right? And that all of us probably hold ourselves to that standard. So after that fire, there was a couple guys in our department who were on the fire who looked at it and just said, we need to, maybe the self accountability of an organization said, we need to do a little bit better, and we can do a little bit better. And so what really happened was a bunch of us got together and we started to really examine and look at, do we know everything we think we know about forcible entry? Is that really a strength of ours, or is it just sort of a perceived strength, right? Because we've never really been challenged. And so really what ended up happening is this class sort of developed and morphed out of that fire and out of the thirst for knowledge and training, and to make sure that we knew what we were doing. I never set out, and John never set out to be fire service instructors. I never wanted to, really, it was never a goal or an ambition of mine. It just sort of happened because of really just a shortcoming, and what I thought was a strength of mine ended up being a weakness, right? And so when I think about that, and I think about that fire years ago, right, and I think about, from my perspective, what that story really illustrates is that forcible entry sets a tone for your fire ground. Whether it's a quick door pop, you get it open, the line gets stretched inside, we get the fire knocked down, building gets searched, people get out, or whether it's a prolonged forcible entry and a story like I just told, where you got 3 or 4 guys standing on the front stoop of a house, mule kicking and chopping at a door for 5 minutes while there's a lady wallowing in smoke behind the door and desperately needs to get out. So when I think about a forcible entry from that perspective, there's an onus that's placed on us as firefighters that we have to constantly be evaluating and recognizing the way people are fortifying their buildings. And by doing that, by recognizing that and understanding how buildings are locked and how doors and locks and drop bars and slide bolts operate, we understand how they fail. And if we understand how they fail, then we can come up with a game plan to attack it, a plan A, plan B, plan C, so on and so forth, right? You're gonna hear us talk a lot about a game plan tonight and having a plan A to attack your door. Almost as you go up to it, almost subconsciously, you just look at it and take all that information in and say, this is the easiest way for me to attack this door, right? And our plan A is almost always gonna be the irons. Right? If we look at a door and we are able to recognize a door and we're able to look at the way it's locked and understand the way it fails, it allows us to attack that door based on skill and ability, rather than leave it to kicking doors my whole career and I've never had to use this how again. So really, why bother? And then we wind up like a cautionary tale to start a webinar or a class, right? So I'll turn it over to John and we'll kind of get into the meat and potatoes of this presentation.
So as far as this presentation goes, it's for firefighters by firefighters. And, like Lynch has already said, that this was developed out of a need from some people on our department that said we had a weakness and we're going to develop something. And with that being said, this class, there's no gimmicks. All this stuff is tried and true. And I think one of the coolest things for me is, I'm a 2nd generation recipient of this. So whereas, Brian might have been one of the original people helping out, Ryan Royal, some of the other folks with Irons and Ladders, I've been fortunate to have this as part of my culture since I've been on the job. And, we now get this as part of our training academy. And not only do you get to apply it, obviously, on the drill ground, but to be able to see this on the fireground work as well, I can tell you with absolute certainty that there are no gimmicks in here. This system is tried and true. And if we don't know the answer, we'll tell you, and we won't give you any myths either. So Lynch kind of talked a little bit about the system that we implement when we talk about sizing up these doors. And, in the fire service, we've become very accustomed to the idea of doing an overall size up, but we do these door size ups as well. Every time we approach a door, we start big picture to small picture. It always starts with occupancy type. This can tell you, occupancy type alone can tell you how fortified something might be. building construction type, tell you how that door is actually going to react once we start prying on it, type of frame and jamb, type of door material, which way the door swings, inward or outward. If we can see the hinges, we know it's outward. And then the types of locks and bolt patterns. And one of the things you'll also hear us say multiple times is the primary lock and then secondary locks. And when we talk about primary lock, we're talking about what is the manufacturer designed to keep this thing locked. Secondary locks, what's been fabricated after the fact, whether that's slide bolts, drop bars, or whatever that may be.
Okay, so first thing we'll look at is primary locks, and we start talking about commercial locks. We look at rim cylinders. I know there's some different nomenclature around the country about what we look at rim cylinders as like rim cylinders are synonymous with panic hardware. Panic bar, like in the bottom right quadrant of the screen there, like a push bar, panic bar, whatever. There's a really easy way to identify a rim cylinder and a panic bar from the outside of the building. If you look at these pictures, the top two pictures and the bottom left picture, and if I locate the keyway and I locate the cylinder for that lock, if it's inset inside the handle in any way, and I don't think I have a mouse to be able to drag over it, at least it's showing up, but if I look at these handles and I see like the top left, they got the top and bottom grab handle, the keyway is inset inside the handle. The top right, I've got the little thumb latch and the keyway is inset inside that handle, quarter turn handle at the bottom left corner there. All of those right away, I look at that. If I see a keyway or the cylinder that's inset in the handle, it's going to be panic hardware or panic bar on the backside. There's lots of tips and tricks on the internet about how to force these, and really they're very simple and easy. We can remove that cylinder with a Rex tool or K tool, whatever. And get behind that and be able to manipulate it and go through the lock on these for service calls and medicals, man down, that kind of stuff. And for conventional forcible entry, really it's no match for, if you look at the bottom right corner there, that the little latch on a panic bar, it sits like, like maybe a quarter inch to like an inch onto a little bracket that's just zip screwed into the frame of the door. So when we start to force on that, we start to apply the leverage with the Halligan, we defeat these really, really simple and really, really easily. Okay. The next type of commercial lock, we'll see these mortise cylinders. We see these are probably one of the most common types of commercial locks, if not the most common type. We see them very frequently on aluminum style doors. Aluminum style door, like if you look at the bottom right-hand corner where the picture of the fast food restaurant right there looks like somebody shot a cannonball through the bottom of it. If that's aluminum style door, what we refer to. What do we always hear about this? If anybody wants to, chime in, it's more of a rhetorical question, but like the one thing we always hear about this is like you'll hear somebody say, just break the glass. That's what I was taught to do, is just break the glass. The problem with it is that breaking the glass, why that's not going to be my plan A is there's really, really a few reasons. The first is that once I break that glass, I lose control of the fire dynamics in that building, or at least I lose control of the airflow into that building by that door. There's no way for me to shut that back up again. And this isn't going to be a fire behavior class, but it's something when we make entry into the building. I think if anything, the last 10, 12 years of the UL stuff and what that's really taught us is that we do have an impact by opening up doors into the building. And it doesn't have to be a subtle impact. Just by breaking that glass, we can cause a pretty drastic change pretty quickly. So anytime, my rule of thumb is anytime we open up a building, whether it's intentional ventilation or we break open a door, then we need the ability to either close that door back up or flow water, right? And if we break the glass, then there's really no way for us to do that. The problem with that is, like, for this, I could break the glass on that, on a lot of these, but if I've got bars behind them or I've got a steel mesh behind it, then I'm not going to be able to get through that in a timely fashion, right? The second reason is that even if I go after the glass, there's no guarantee that it's tempered or plate glass. It might be some like Lexan or another type of security glass that, we can pound on that thing for 45 minutes and we're not going to get inside of it, right? It's designed to keep criminals and people out. So when we think about probably the primary reason though that I'm not going to break the glass on these as my plan A is these cylinders, these mortise cylinders can be pulled within 15, 20 seconds, and we'll gain access into that building very quickly and very easily. If you're going to a commercial fire, get dispatched to a commercial fire, throw the Rex tool in your pocket, throw the K tool in your pocket. You can rip these cylinders out and then screw them back in after the fire's over. And then we've had luck. I've had luck where the occupant comes in and their key still actually works even after we pull it out and then screw the mortise cylinder back in. The next type we'll look at are these tubular deadbolts. And these are probably one of the most common types of locks for residential and commercial. They're pretty easy to manipulate to go through the lock. We just Rex tool behind it, pull the shroud back, and then move that latch over into the unlock position. We can lock it back up that way as well. And they're really no match for conventional forcible entry. Once we start to pry on this door, there's usually only like 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches worth of throw from the bolt into the keeper or into the frame of the door. We overcome it pretty quick and pretty easy, right? So the first thing we do, big picture to small picture, like John talked about, and then identify our primary lock. Then we look at our secondary locks.
So most of the time when we're talking about secondary locks, we're generally talking about drop bars, just because the way that these are manufactured, the way that these are made, it's pretty easy for somebody, even if they don't have a high level of craftsmanship, to be able to put these together. Generally, we're looking at these carriage bolts. Sometimes the carriage bolts can get confused with slide bolts, depending on how close they are in proximity to the edge of the door. But anytime we see these mirroring bolt patterns, even if they're not perfectly straight across and they're a little bit offset, we would have a high level of suspicion that we're dealing with some sort of drop bar. One of the reoccurring themes that we do talk about, though, is the fact that we always start conventional. And one of the biggest reasons that we talk about starting conventional is because, and we've seen it even in recent history, of people either not putting their drop bars in place during the day, or a new occupant comes in, they completely remove any sort of hardware they had in place for a drop bar, and you basically have bolts that are tricking you into thinking that there's something on the other side. We had a building recently that was known for being one of the most fortified buildings in our district. A new occupant had recently bought it. They removed all the internal hardware, but the carriage bolts were still in place. So if you walked up to that door and you did your size up and you said, I have a primary lock that's a deadbolt, and then I've got these drop bars because I've got the mirroring bolt patterns, you might have tricked yourself into thinking you had a harder door than you actually did. So even though you should have a level of suspicion that there's drop bars, if you see these mirroring bolt patterns, we always start conventional, because it'll tell us whether a drop bar is even in place. And it'll also tell us where the resistance is and how fortified that drop bar might actually be. Once we go through our progression of conventional forcible entry, we get our adds in the door, we hook the back side, we start to pull, and we feel that resistance. One of two things is going to happen. If the drop bar is not in place, it's going to be an easy door. If the drop bar is in place, we'll get an idea of where the resistance is. And then if we have one or more drop bars, that'll kind of change our order of operations of how we're going to go about attacking that. So I would say, as a general rule of thumb, if you've got one drop bar in play, you can generally defeat these with driving these carriage bolts with your irons. And we'll show a video of that in a second of what that looks like. If you've got 2 or more drop bars in place, that's when you really want to start thinking about bringing saws into the operation. And with that in mind, there's multiple different ways of using your saws to get these carriage bolt heads out of the way. So let me show this. Whoops. Let's go back one. So slide bolts, as I talked about before, sometimes these can be a little bit deceiving. If you look at the one on the bottom left-hand side, if you had mirroring slide bolts on both sides, that could trick you into thinking that you had a drop bar. My general thought process is, if, I've got carriage bolts that are, maybe 1 inch or more off the edge of the door, I would have some suspicion that that might be a slide bolt as well. Also, if they're not mirroring, you might be thinking slide bolt. Also, the bolts themselves generally aren't as big. Sometimes you will see those carriage bolts, but you can pretty much differentiate between drop bars and slide bolts based on where they are in the door, and then generally the type of bolt that you're looking at as well. When we look at these slide bolts, overcoming these is not extremely difficult. Again, conventional is what we're starting with. We go in with our adds, we feel that resistance. A lot of times, if we have a setup like we're looking at here, where you have a key and knob block, a deadbolt, and maybe a slide bolt, very easy operation, as opposed to having to go into a little bit more of an arduous operation with a drop bar. One of the things that a lot of people talk to us about or ask us about is, what if you have slide bolts on the hinge side? So a lot of times you'll see slide bolts on this latch side. What if you have them on the hinge side? Slide bolts on the hinge side are a non-issue to us. If you think about how the door actually opens up, if you can defeat the slide bolt nearest the latch, the other one is just going to open up like a hinge. So, you know, don't be intimidated by these doors. If you walk up and you've got a slide bolt pattern on the latch side and a slide bolt pattern on the hinge side, you're going to go for the latch side, and the hinge side should open just like a door. I mentioned before that there's multiple ways to get through these drop bar bolts if we identify a need. As I mentioned before, you know, my breakover is if we have one drop bar, this is something that we can probably handle with conventional forcible entry using our irons. And this is the method in which we would go about getting through them, driving these bolts. So you'll see here, he goes just below that top bolt, drives it in, excuse me, the bottom bolt, goes over the top of this one. And the idea is basically just to create as much damage as you can in between these. You might see, you know, people go back in with their pike right in the middle or with their adze like he's doing here. But the idea is I'm creating so much damage that I can get that the bracket on the back side defeated. One of the things you'll notice that he's doing here as well is he's attacking the latch side bracket first. So it's to our benefit to attack that side first, simply because most of the time we can actually fail the entire drop bar just by taking that one latch out of play. If you think about how we're going to go about opening this door, most of our resistance is going to be on that latch side. There is potential with certain doors that you might have to take both of those brackets out of play, but that's pretty rare, especially in the case of defeating this to the point that it's just barely hanging on. We go right back in with our adze, and we might even be able to hit that bar out with some sort of tool, especially if we have an L bracket. Okay, so I mentioned there is a breakover point where we aren't going to be able to use our irons to go through these bolts. And that would either be that you have a plate in the way like you see here, or you just have multiple bars and it's too arduous of an operation for you to just simply do it with your hand tools. So there's two methods for getting through this with an abrasive disc. Shaving is when you have a plate, or you know, you might even have some washers in the way that are preventing you from plunging your saw blade in. So this is a very surface and shallow operation. And one of the things you'll see here is he kind of scores it, and then he's basically going as close to the surface as he can to get rid of those heads. A word of caution here that we've noticed with experience is if you don't get the last little bit of that bolt that's remaining and poke it through with your pike, it can actually give you some trouble. You wouldn't think it would. You shave the entire head off. There's just a little bit remaining, a little bit of material remaining, but that little bit of material has hung us up on multiple doors. So if you're going to go for this operation, remove all the bolt heads and make sure you hit it through with your pike. The plunging operation, he's going to take his saw and simply just at an angle go right through the entire bolt itself. Oops. So you can see here, he's keeping it really close to the edge of that plate, taking all of these heads off at once. And you can almost see that material that I'm talking about. There's usually just a little bit of residual material that's holding on there, and that's just enough to get you hung up. So while it doesn't show it on the video, my recommendation would be if you're going to use a saw to get these heads out of the way, make sure that you use your pike of your Halligan to drive that through, just that last little bit. And this is plunging, so if you don't have an obstruction like a plate in the way, you score it. And the goal is basically to come in almost at a 45-degree angle, and then you just take the entire bolts out of play. Unlike shaving the heads, you don't have to really worry about any residual material holding on because you're literally cutting this bolt in half. So there should be nothing holding on the backside. So theoretically at this point, especially if we took the time.
You see the two mounts, this is the one that had the plate and it's still on there, actually pretty solid. Whereas this one here will pull right out because we did the plunge cuts all the way down and it's a nice clean cut. This will still hold on enough that would hang you up on the inside. So.
And he's just reiterating what I was talking about there, that last little bit holding on. But theoretically, if you had a scenario just like this, where you've got a plate on one side, open bolts on the other, you shave one side, you plunge the other, and then that entire drop bar is out of play. provided that you took the time to get rid of that little extra bit of material. Okay, so now that we've talked about our different locking mechanisms, the different ways that we can lock a door, both with primary means like a tubular deadbolt or secondary means like a drop bar, we're going to start going into our size up process and what that looks like, both big picture to small picture, and then some of the different things that we've seen in real life. So these doors have been taken from pictures that we have locally in our city, you know, and I'm sure many of you have seen similar doors throughout your districts. So we're going to go through the process of sizing this up and then also talking about a plan of attack. So door number one, right off the bat, we know we have a commercial building. This one's a little bit more difficult to see, but this is a wood frame building. We've got a metal frame and metal jamb. I know it's outward swinging because the hinges are facing me. Right off the bat, I'm looking at my primary lock. I see a rim lock. So going back to what Lynch said before, I know that my handle and my locking assembly are one. So I'm dealing with some sort of panic bar. The panic bar in and of itself wouldn't necessarily be a big issue to me as far as going conventional. I could get it open very quickly simply because of that slam latch. I've got mirroring bolt patterns for number two with these carriage bolts. Right away with these mirroring bolt patterns, even though I don't see 4 bolts or 2 bolts, this one's kind of rare because I see 3. I'm right away thinking I've got some sort of drop bar setup. I'm going to anticipate that, but I'm still going conventional with this door. Slide bolts. So number 3, if you look at it, if this was mirroring on both sides, you might think to yourself, I have a drop bar, but you can see how close in proximity those bolts are to the edge. So right away, just with the proximity and their placement, I would be thinking I have some sort of slide bolt or hasp. And then number 4, I've got these odd bolts on the outside. I would be thinking I have some sort of additional security, whether that's a roll down door or some sort of cage on the other side. And that's exactly what we're looking at here. So to start off with, we've got our panic bar as we anticipated, because we do have that handle and the locking assembly as one. We do have a drop bar, so those mirroring bolt patterns were correct. And we do have those 2 slide bolts. We also have this after hours door, this roll down door. So let me talk about the door itself first, and then we'll talk about the roll down door. So our plan of attack on this one, if we look at the way that this door is manufactured and the way that it's fabricated, realistically, this is not a door that I would necessarily be super intimidated by. First of all, you know, just looking at the drop bar setup itself, the brackets don't seem to be heavily fortified. The drop bar itself is not super fortified. I would anticipate that more than likely we would be able to get our adds in here, give it a strong pull, and even if the drop bar is still intact, we're looking at L brackets. So our ability to take something like a New York roof hook, slide it in there and hit it out is very high. So the door itself, conventional irons, I would anticipate would probably do the trick on this one. We obviously could take the bolts if we had to, but I wouldn't anticipate that that would be a need. Opening it up to the group, I mean, I know we don't really have necessarily a Q&A, but can irons get through this door? Can it get through the outside of this door? So we fail this door on the outside, and then right away we encounter this door here, this roll down door. The general consensus, I would guess, is probably not, you know, especially if it's as fortified as it looks like here. If for some reason irons can't get through the door, our standard operation for us would be a barn door cut on something like this. Older models of this door, you might be able to remove the individual slats, but newer models of these doors, that's pretty hard to do. So if I ran into this in a fireground, especially being on a truck, my first thought would be I need to get a K970 and think about taking this door.
Yep.
All right, so we're going to reiterate this system over and over again. We're going to be driving this system home because this is the system that we use every time we encounter a door. So door number 2, we've got a pawn shop, masonry building, metal frame, metal jamb. It's outward swinging yet again. We can see the hinges facing us, and we have a metal door. Our primary lock, as we mentioned before, this is going to be a key and knob lock. And, you know, one of the things that I ask people is, you know, when you look at doors like these, would a responsible business owner only keep a key and knob lock to keep their business fortified? Probably not. So that's something to keep in mind, especially in your district. So we've got a key and knob lock. We've got a latch guard. The latch guards, honestly, with something that's this small, I would just go above or below. Not necessarily a huge issue for us in terms of leverage. And then again, we've got mirroring bolt patterns. Whoever put this together did a pretty good job of keeping these symmetrical. I've got one low and high. At a surface level or upon approaching this door, I would be fairly, you know, I would think I probably got 2 drop bars, but that doesn't necessarily intimidate me. Because again, if it's, you know, business hours, they might not even have these doors in place. One of the things we do talk about a lot with these double doors is how do you locate the primary door or the door that you're going to be attacking? There's giveaways like on this one, for instance, you would be attacking the one with the side that has the key and knob lock. Sometimes it's not that simple. So we can look at exterior clues as well to tell us which door is used primarily. So for instance, if you look at the bottom of the door on the red door here, you'll see that the concrete on the left-hand side is intact. Whoever's walking through there, there's barely any foot traffic. Whereas on the right side, tons of foot traffic, that concrete is completely degraded. So some of these exterior clues will tell us which door we need to attack. So my plan of attack for this, again, I'm going conventional. In the case of a double door, I'm attacking the side that's the primary door. So in this case, I would be going in with my adds on the right-hand side. And this is what we're looking at on the backhand side. So we've got full-length drop bars, both high and low. We've got very well-made half-inch bar and mounts. If these drop bars aren't in place, super simple door, right? Because we're looking at nothing more than a key and knob lock. And that's why I brought up the point of you kind of have to think about your district too. How many business owners are only going to lock their door with a key and knob lock? These bars are also set behind the jamb. So that might actually be somewhat of a failure point for us, just because although these are very beefy and it's well fortified, there is a little bit of a lip there where we might have an opportunity to get through this. Again, though, I'm going conventional. And one of the things we also talk about is every time you go conventional, your Halligan will tell you the resistance of the door. Not only that, your tools will fail the weakest point. So in this case, the weakest point might be the fact that we don't have a ton of space on that jamb there. But regardless, I'm going to go conventional. It's to my benefit that I have L brackets on these, because if I can start creating space or creating distance, there's a possibility, like I said before, I can get a New York roof hook in here and simply hit those bars out. And this is an example of them physically doing this on a door. We had an opportunity some years back to go to a grocery store, and we were basically able to take all the doors that were normally in our district that we had pictures of and recreate them on grocery store doors and be able to show the people that we teach that this is very possible, even with conventional forcible entry. So hooks the back of this door with the adds. Going to sink it to full depth here, give it a hard pull. And with that hard pull, you'll be able to feel right away where the resistance of that door is. One of the things that you notice is he goes up, down first. That gives you the full leverage of the tool first. It also gives you a good amount of crush just to kind of keep that space open and to continue to operate in that area. Pretty much maxed out there, but he can visualize what he's working with. So he's visualized these bars. He can start working up to each bar or working down to each bar individually to see if you can fail at least one. One of the things that we've noticed about with these two is some of these, double drop bar setups. If you fail one, you can make a lot of headway with these doors. An axe handle is a little bit harder to try to fit in there as far as space goes to get a bar out of the way. I've mentioned the New York roof hook multiple times. It's just because when you think about how thick it is, it really gives you a lot of opportunity to get that tool fit in there and get it nice and deep. So order of operations, they've tried to go conventional. It doesn't work for them. At this point, they make the determination that they're going to switch to actually taking those carriage bolts. And as I mentioned before, these can be attacked with your irons. He's going closest to the actual latch itself, and he's attacking the top bar because that's the one he's looked at and isolated. Gets that full crush on the bar. Crushing out all that material there, and then goes right back to conventional. My guess would be that Ryan thought, I've failed this to the point that I can probably go conventional with this, or at least get enough space that I can get a tool in there and then hit this drop bar out of that L bracket. And here's Nick Chappell transitioning to a more suitable tool to hit that bar out. There you go. That bar's out of place. That creates enough distance or space now to work back down with the Halligan. And now you have enough daylight to be able to hit that other bar out. Both bars are out of play. So you've taken a door that from the exterior, and even after probably sinking your adds in, would be intimidating for most. And it's a pretty quick operation, no more than a couple minutes here. of simply just getting that one bracket out of play so that you have enough daylight to get the first bar. Once the first bar is out, the tension off that door is significant, and then you can simply go back down, readjust your tool, and then hit the second bar out. This is a huge benefit for L bracket mounts. We'll see some enclosed mounts later, makes it a lot more difficult. You actually have to remove most of the brackets. But if you have L brackets like this, as you can see, conventional irons are a very good option. All right, door number 3. So big picture to small picture, we're on the backside of a bar. We've got a masonry block building, metal frame, metal jamb, again, outward swinging because the hinges are facing me. Primary lock, there's a question mark on here for a couple of reasons. First of all, you can see that the handle itself's been readjusted. Second of all, if you look at the actual locking cylinder itself, there's nothing present. So there's been some modification to this door, but just going along the lines of what we talked about before, the lock and handle assembly are one. So, and you've got these flat bolts on the right-hand side. So right away, I'd be thinking I have some sort of panic bar. That's my primary lock. Drop bar bolt pattern with steel plates. So again, we're still going conventional. We're still going to feel this door. If it's an L bracket, we might be able to just go conventional and open this door up. Regardless, going conventional is at least going to tell us where our resistance is. I would make a mental note of this though, the fact that we have steel plates, because what that's telling me is there's a possibility if we have to switch to saw work, I would be potentially shaving the heads on these. Up top, number 3, again, close proximity with those bolts, we're probably looking at some sort of slide bolt. And that's exactly what we're looking at here. So we do have an older style panic bar at the bottom as our primary lock. We do have that slide bolt up top that we talked about. And then when you look at the actual assembly of the drop bar itself, we've got a very heavy duty tubular drop bar. We've got a weak slide bolt up top, and then tactics for this. So when we talk about tactics, again, it's going to be conventional. You know, our Halligan's going to show us the weakest point. Even though we've got really nice brackets, like whoever built this did a really good job. They've got L brackets, they've got a reinforced curved elbow. So trying to bend this over is almost impossible, right? But again, if we start looking at the weakness of this system, the bar itself is barely over that jamb. You know, and depending on what the strength of that jamb, that might be our failure point. We start prying on that. We might even add a little bit extra leverage, but regardless, our Halligan, our tools are going to show us the weakest point, and then we can reevaluate from there. All right, door number 4. We've got a furniture rental store, masonry construction, metal frame, metal jamb, inward swinging. When I look at this door, the only thing I'm really seeing is a key in the knob lock. We have no bolt patterns present. And going back to what I talked about before, just knowing your district, thinking about a responsible business owner. If I've got a furniture rental store, I've got thousands of dollars worth of furniture. Is it realistic to think that the only thing that's going to be stopping a burglar is a key and knob lock? More than likely not. This opens up a good discussion for us, though, when we talk about inward swinging doors, because when we think about how these have to be mounted, you know, we talk to people and we say, would you see the mounts on the door itself? Well, you wouldn't. If you think about how this door is going to swing, if the mounts were on the door itself and the bar set on the mounts, if we went to open the door, the bar would just go with it, right? So in order for somebody to mount these, it has to be mounted either to the frame or outside of the frame to make it work. So occasionally you'll see carriage bolts that are actually, like I've seen them on the frame itself. Somebody's drilled through the frame. But a lot of the times people just weld it to the other side. So as a visual indicator, you're probably not going to see anything. With that in mind, just knowing what type of occupancy we have and knowing our district, I would automatically be thinking this is probably a little bit more than what it appears to be from the outside. Going back to our order of operations, though, I'm still going to go conventional, and ideally I'm going to go gap set force. When we look at the backside of this, we're looking at a drop bar. So as I mentioned before, we have brackets that are welded right to the frame. The benefit to us with this bracket is we've got an L bracket on the side that's nearest the latch. So that's actually to our benefit because we could potentially bend that over or strike right on the bar if we get the daylight to do so. If that enclosed mount were on the other side, we'd be looking at a little bit more of an issue. You can actually see there's a hole on the L bracket as well. So they might potentially do some sort of padlock, but realistically, if we can do our traditional gapping, if we can get our forks in there, get a good force, get the daylight to be able to see the bar itself, we're simply going to take our forks and drive it home. And we have an example of that in just a moment here. So they're doing their gapping right now. They're starting low on the door because more than likely this is pretty tight. And that's another dead giveaway. If you feel something that's really tight and all you're seeing is a key and knob lock, I know I have something else. So set the forks. And then they got lucky here. So where they put their forks just happened to be right on the bar. Sometimes what ends up happening is you might be below or above, but you open the door up enough to see that bar and then you just drive right on it.
Okay.
Door
number 5. Yeah. Commercial building. This is a single story strip mall. Masonry construction. We can see the cinder block around the outside of it, metal frame and jam, outward swinging metal door, right? So I go big picture to small picture, just like John was talking about. If we practice that every time, and we do that every time we do a size up, whether it's online in a presentation like this, or when we're out in our district getting familiar with the buildings we're going to fight fires in. If I do that every time, it becomes like mental muscle memory. And so I do it naturally when I pull up to that building that's on fire, right? So I go big picture to small picture. I look, I've got a key and knob lock, and I've got this latch guard. And like John talked about before, going above or below that latch guard is going to defeat it. I don't have to worry about defeating that latch guard, getting it out of place, right? If I go above it or below that latch guard, you're talking the key and knob locks on these buildings, it's only like a 1/2 inch to 1 inch throw into the frame. The stress that we place on that lock, the torsional stress we place on that lock with the Halligan will defeat that without having to take away that latch guard. If you look directly above it, it might be a little bit difficult to see, but right where that yellow arrow is pointing, there's a little cylindrical plate right in the area where I would anticipate seeing a deadbolt, right? And in this case, I don't. I just have this plate that's been painted over that's put in that place. So that tells me it's one of two things. Number one, the door came with a hole for the deadbolt in it. And the guy decided I'm not going to put a deadbolt in, but he put a plate on the outside to keep the weather out and to keep, kids from coming by and putting cigarettes and firecrackers and all that other stuff inside the building, right? Or he took the shroud from the outside and the cylinder and the keyway from the outside, removed that completely, and you can still operate that deadbolt from inside, but only from inside the building, right? That's probably less likely to me, but again, it doesn't really matter until I put my tool on the door and I start to force and I look for that resistance. Right above that you can see this carriage bolt pattern, and this is one of those scenarios where I look at this and I have a rectangular carriage bolt pattern high on the lock side of this door, high on the hinge side of the door, a mirroring pattern that goes straight across, and I've got a similar pattern down below. Right above that bottom hinge, low on the hinge side, low on the lock side. So I look at this, and when I look at carriage bolts and I start to size up this door, really what I'm trying to do is get the expectation of what's behind this door and how's it going to fail, right? So I put it into my mind, I look and think, well, that could either be 2 drop bars or it could be 4 slide bolts. The truth of the matter is I don't really care until I start to force that door, and it's going to tell me what they are, right? I'll be able to, just by the resistance, determine, hey, that's a drop bar or this is a slide bolt, right? When I look at it, there's a couple things that it can be kind of a dead giveaway. If that carriage bolt pattern, if you look at these are mounted very close to the frame of the door, right, on that door. And like John talked about, that's a pretty good indicator that they're probably slide bolts. If they were mounted more towards the middle of the door, I would know it would be 2 drop bars. But since they're got kind of towards the frame of the door, I think probably 4 slide bolts. That's kind of what I prepare for. But that's part of having that plan A, plan B, plan C, so on and so forth, is being able to switch gears real quick and say, oh, these are drop bars. So when I look at this here, this door gives a lot of lessons and a great example of why we always try our irons first. Because when I look at the back side of this door, I have a key and knob lock and I've got a slide bolt up top. The previous 3 bolts have been removed for whatever reason, who knows? But I look at this here, and this is truly probably a 60-second force. I'm going to be able to get through this door very, very quickly. We'll fail that key and knob lock, start to pry on that. I'll recognize my resistance is up top. I'm going to go after that top slide bolt, and we'll defeat that pretty easy. Slide bolts, even this is a pretty good slide bolt. It's got about a 2.5 inch, 3 inch throw into the frame of the door. even that, the Halligan, that when we start to put the leverage of the Halligan on that, we usually defeat it pretty quickly and easily, especially when we add the addition of a cheater bar or something. We'll talk, and we'll go into that a little bit later. The one thing I want to point out about this, when I look at the door and why we always try our irons first, you know, if you read like firefighting textbooks and manuals, like the Essentials of Firefighting in the Forcible Entry chapter, it will tell you if you find a metal door and a metal frame encased in concrete with additional security devices or security locks like drop bars or slide bolts, we should just find another way in, right? That's their solution. That's their plan A, is just find another way in, right? And then the suggestion that they make to go in, to get inside the building, is to take a sledgehammer and go through the cinder block wall next to it. If anybody has ever tried to do that, gone through a cinder block wall with a sledgehammer, you know that it's incredibly physically taxing, right? Even for guys who are in shape, it's incredibly physically taxing. We have to remember that we've got to go to work after that. So not only is it physically taxing, it takes forever to get through. And I look at the point where they say, like, just find another way in. Well, if this is my business and I've done this to this door, what are the chances that I just left another door that gets into my business to steal all my stuff with just a key and knob lock, right? It's not really practical to think that way. And just because what we see from the outside of the building, as proven by this photo, here, is not always what we're going to have. This is a simple and easy force. We're inside the building. We can mask up, get inside, get our line to the seat of the fire, or we can search that building quickly. So we look at door number 6. And when I look at door number 6, brick construction, metal frame and jamb, it's an outward swinging metal door, right? So big picture, small picture. I've got a key and knob lock, and I've got a deadbolt. And I've got a latch guard that's kind of on the side. It really looks like it was protecting that key and knob lock initially, right? If I look up high on this door, high on the lock side, I see this triangular bolt pattern, right? And then if I look across towards the hinge side, high on the hinge side, I've got that same pattern. So again, it goes back to like what we talked about in the previous door. I don't know if it's a drop bar or I don't know if it's slide bolts, right? But if I look down low, right where that yellow arrow is pointing, down low on the lock side, I've got another triangular bolt pattern. This photo is grainy, I get it. It was taken with like original iPhone like 12 years ago. Yeah, it was taken years ago. So and I'm just too lazy to drive back over to this building and take another one. That's the truth of the matter. But if I look at that, I've got that triangular bolt pattern down low on the lock side. But if you go across that door, low on the hinge side, there's not another bolt pattern. So that all but tells me these are 3 slide bolts. That's going to be my plan A. I know right away those are 3 slide bolts. Then I look at the right above the key and knob lock there, right to the right, and just above the key and knob lock, we've got that 2 carriage bolts in that vertical pattern with pretty big washers behind them. So that, to me, right away I look and I think that's a bracket for a drop bar. And if I were to move over to the hinge side of the door, and I would see if I saw a similar bracket, then or a similar carriage bolt pattern, I would think it's another bracket, and that's a drop bar in place. It's pretty simple and straightforward. But in this case, I don't. I just have this one bolt that's kind of dead center in the middle of that door. So normally when we're in our class, you know, in a classroom setting where we're live, we're with each other, you know, I'll ask people just, you know, hazard a guess and tell me what you think that is. And we get all sorts of different answers. And if anybody wants to chime in and say what they think it is, please feel free. But, you know, I get all sorts of answers from it, from like, you know, a multi-lock, a fox lock, a police lock, you know, a bunch of different scenarios. The truth of the matter is, when I first saw this, I didn't really know what it was going to be. I wasn't really 100% positive. I just knew that there was going to be something there that I might have to contend with if it's in place, right? And we don't always have to know specifically what we're up against. Really, what John said before is probably the best rule of forcible entry is put your tool on the door and start to attack the door, attack the resistance, and find where your resistance is and attack the resistance. And if I look at the back side of this door, basically everything we thought behind this door was there. Key and knob lock, deadbolt. I got a gate bolt up high and down low, just like I thought, and one on the hinge side. And then, you know, we call this a pivoting arm drop bar. You hear them called, you know, circular drop bars, cylindrical drop bars, rotating drop bars, whatever. The point is that you can see that the way it operates is it just swings into place, and just on that middle bolt acts as the hinge, sits into that bracket, and then sits against that door. So when I look at this, does this drop bar, does it change our style of attack? Because we talked about before, and John reiterated this, we go from lock side to hinge side. And if we defeat that lock side, we likely have the leverage to defeat anything that's on that hinge side. So the fact that there's 2 bolts on the lock side of the door and only 1 bolt in the center of the door, would anybody out there attack? Just think, you know, I guess maybe again, rhetorically speaking, would anybody out there say, I'm going right for that center bolt? And when I look at it, you know, I understand the temptation, but if I defeat that center bolt, there's no guarantee that I'm actually defeating that drop bar. Think about if oftentimes with some of these, we'll see they will pin the drop bar to the bracket, or they'll pin the drop bar through the frame of that door where it sits on the frame of that door. So if I defeat that center bolt, there's really no guarantee that I'm actually defeating that drop bar. So it doesn't really necessarily change our style of attack. We're not trying to throw a curveball to anybody, but just stick with that rule of thumb, work lock side over to hinge side. Okay, door number 7 is a little bit of a different door because it's going to be first residential door that we look at, and it's an inward swinging wood door, right? And this is a great door that really exemplifies a company that shows up, that has a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C, and knows and understands how to attack their door, brings their tools with them every single time. This is this was an alarm for like a man down. He hit his medical alert button, and he was laying in his living room or in his kitchen or whatever. They could look in the window and they could see him laying in there, but he was hurt, injured. He couldn't get to the door to unlock it. Every door was locked, and every window had like burglar bars on, so they couldn't go through the windows, right? So they recognize they obviously got to get into this. They choose this door. Their plan A is going to be to go through the lock. So they pop the plate of that key and knob lock, the bottom lock there, because they know it's locked. They pop the plate off, they unlock it, and that door is still snug. They take the Rex tool, go behind that shroud of that of the deadbolt up above there, and you can actually, if you look close enough, you can see the scrape marks on that metal plate. They got behind that, unlock that deadbolt, and that door was still really, really snug. I mean, not budging or moving at all. So right away they knew through the lock's not going to be an option. But they brought their Halligan and their axe with them. They brought their irons. So they went to work conventionally on this door, right? And when we look at the backside of it, this is what they encountered. Right? They got a key and knob lock and a deadbolt. They had a very good plan A, a very good plan B to go through the lock, but they also thought far enough ahead to say, if that's not going to work, we're going to have to do conventional forcible entry to get in and help this guy. This is a pretty stout drop bar in enclosed brackets that's bolted into the king stud on either side of this. So when I look at this, it really gives me a couple different lessons. Number one, John said it before, the Halligan will fail the weakest link. And in this case, which is a little bit unusual, the weakest link actually ends up being our door. You can see it kind of tacoed it and V'd it in underneath that deadbolt. The second and probably the more important lesson here is that if these guys would have relied on kicking this door open, they never would have got it open. Right? This is why kicking doors is wasted experience. The story I told to start this about, you know, the woman behind the door and that the guys on the front stoop mule kicking that door, it took them 5 minutes to kick in a door that had a key and knob lock and it had a deadbolt. It had two simple locks just like this. If they would have had a drop bar to encounter, they never would have got through that. The guys that went to this, the company that went to this door, they had a good game plan. They attacked that door, plan A, plan B, plan C. They got in less than 3 minutes and they were able to render care to this guy who really needed it, right? So like we said before, always develop that plan A, recognize what you're up against, and don't be afraid to switch right away when you know your plan doesn't work. Okay, door number 8 is a grocery store, wood frame building, metal frame and jamb, outward swinging metal door. When I look at this building here, this is pretty standard commercial door for basically every single, I guarantee you, every single one of you has got this door in your district. Somewhere, right? Key and knob lock with a deadbolt and a latch guard. And then if you look up here, it's a little bit difficult to see, but if you look about 2 feet above that deadbolt on the lock side, you've got 2 little bolts there that really kind of indicate to me that it's probably a slide bolt. So when I see this, I look at this right away and I think this is a pretty standard force. Gap set force, we're going to get the defeat the primary lock, defeat the deadbolt, then we're going to move up to that slide bolt if it's in place, find the resistance and get this door open. When we look at the back side of it, there's really not a whole lot to it on that lock side. Key and knob lock, deadbolt, and we got this cheap little gate bolt. And if you look down low, down below that line that's kind of on the bottom of the door, there's a little tiny little slide bolt that they put in place that I think that's more like it's like what I would use to keep a medicine cabinet closed. Like you're probably not even going to feel that when you're forcing it. You're just going to break it open because it's not going to provide you any resistance at all. If I look at the hinge side of this door, I've got not only the hinges, but I've got these 3 very strong slide bolts. These are pretty good barrel bolts or slide bolts. They throw into the door, 3 inches or so. They're going to provide some pretty significant resistance for us. So really the opportunity, when we look at the back of this door, it provides us the opportunity to talk about one thing that we always get told is, and the one thing I was told about commercial forcible entry is just take the hinges. The hinges are the easiest way in, right? And what I think that stems from is probably guys who have never put their hands on a tool and tried to take the hinges before. The best way to look at hinges, especially commercial hinges like this, at any commercial building, is I treat each hinge like it's a lock. So when I look at this, I look at not only do I have the 3 hinges, but I've got these 3 other barrel bolts that are completely, I'd be oblivious to their location until I actually start to force that door. Taking the hinges is not as easy as is sort of broadcast. A lot of guys will say it's just cut them off real quick or knock the pins out or just rip them out. It doesn't really work that way. I've taken classes, forcible entry classes before where, they put like a little wooden dowel in there and then you rip that wooden dowel off, but that's not really indicative of how difficult it is. When we look at attacking a door and attacking hinges, right, we're going to do it either with saws or we're going to do it with hand tools, right? And if I'm going to do it with, and I'm not going to say that hinges wouldn't ever be on my game plan, they're just really, really low. But if I'm going to do it, I want to know the way to do it. So we're going to attack these hinges here. We got 3 different hinges, 1 high, middle, and low. So I'm going to attack that high hinge first. Reason I'm going up for that high hinge is anytime I'm operating a saw up above my head, it's going to take a little bit more energy to do it, a little bit more strength to do it. So I'm going to do the hardest cut I'm going to make first. So I go after this top one here, and you can see it's actually going to take a little bit longer. A lot of guys think that you just zip right through them, like scissors on a paper, and it's just not like that. Most of these hinges are pretty stout, pretty difficult, and they're going to take some time to get through it. So I get through the first one, and then we speed up the video here just because, I don't like to watch myself cutting hinges for that long. And, it takes overall about 2.5 minutes to get through these hinges, just to get the hinges up and out of place. Then we got to put our tool on the door. And once we put our tool on the door, start to force it open, right? If we've got those barrel bolts like we saw in that last picture, then I've got probably another 90 seconds to 2 minutes I've added onto this force, potentially. So we're looking at upwards of like 4 minutes to get inside this door. If I would have just gone to the lock side, right, I've opened up that lock side, we're looking at less than a 60-second force, 90-second force to get inside that, right? So this is probably one of my favorite videos in the world because I get to watch one of my friends suffer trying to attack carriage bolts. But anybody who says it's just easy to go through carriage bolts, to go through hinges with hand tools, obviously has never done it. Now he's going to attack this middle one first here, right? I'll lower the volume just a little bit here, but he's going to attack this middle one first right here, and he gets it out of the way pretty quick and pretty easy. Now keep in mind that he's not wearing an air pack, so he's not adding that extra 35, 40 pounds, right? The key to do this, if you're going to do it, is exactly what he's doing now. Shock those hinges, blast them, hit them as hard as you can, try and fail them, trying to break them a little bit so that maybe they'll pull out of the door and the frame a little bit easier. He goes after these hinges, and you can tell right away he's starting to slow down a little bit, right? This is a guy, he's in pretty good shape. You know, at least he was when this video was taken. He's in pretty good shape, right? Knows and understands mechanical advantage, knows and understands how to use his tools better than a lot of people. So if you look at what he's doing, it's wearing him out just going after these hinges, trying to strip him out. And he was bound and determined to do it by himself, because guys would, you know, jump in to say, hey, will we help you out here? And maybe you'd have some help, but he's at a point now where he's probably about stroke level blood pressure and exhaustion, right?
And he's got to work.
And now the next thing you got to do is, once he rips this open, and once he gets this last hinge out here, right? You can see he's on his knees because he's done, no energy, right? Once he gets that door open, now he's got to mask up, and now he's got to go to work. He's got to search, he's got to heel hose, stuff you're probably not going to be overwhelmingly effective doing when you're that tired, right? So not saying that hinges aren't going to be a possibility for us. They're very low on our game plan. I'm going to turn on the light here.
All right. All right, so door number 9, we've got a tattoo shop, concrete building, metal frame, metal jamb. Again, outward swinging door. It's a metal door. So we've got our key in the knob lock as our primary lock. And when we look at this, you know, we're looking at something that appears to be similar to our drop bolt patterns. What you'll notice is it's offset. So a couple things could have happened here. First of all, you might have had somebody who's just got really poor craftsmanship. Or perhaps you have a handyman who's got one leg that's longer than the other. Or we've got some sort of locking mechanism that's a little bit different than what we would see. Normally we would open this up to the class, but because of the format that we're working with right now, we'll just kind of get into it. So this is a multi-lock. It's, you know, it's just as it looks. It's Z-shaped. It forms somewhat of a scissor. It goes in one side on the latch side, and then it also goes into the hinge side as well. The center action operates it, and then usually you have some sort of pin to lock it in place. The throw on this one's about 2 inches into the jamb. So we usually open this up to the class to talk about our plan of attack and how this differs from a drop bar. If we look at it, you know, we're still going to go conventional. More than likely, I'm going to go right near that key and knob lock. I'm going to feel that resistance right away. And with what we have here and how it's made, the throw that we have, the makeup of the metal itself, more than likely I would be able to get through this with either just my Halligan, or, you know, I would say almost certainly be able to get through it if I added some leverage with a cheater bar. And when we talk about adding leverage with the cheater bar, we'll show it a little bit later, but we're talking about basically adding that 6-foot New York roof hook to the operation to really add additional leverage. When we go to bend this, you know, we talk about how much force we can generate with our Halligan. And obviously this is a little bit of a different application, but you'll be able to see here how much force we can generate. This looks like this is what, probably a quarter inch steel. Able to put that Halligan on that 30-inch bar just with mere hand pressure is able to bend this over. So, you know, again, the application is a little bit different, but if you think about how much force we can apply with our 30-inch bar, that's what makes it possible for us to defeat a multi-lock like this. We hook our adds on the backhand side there. We start to pull, especially if we add leverage. That amount of leverage on this bar is going to fail it. And this is an example of it done in real life. That bar is simply no match for how much leverage we can add on the tool. With that in mind, one of the questions that we ask is, how would the bolt placement impact this operation? So you'll notice, you know, we're probably only 3 to 4 inches off with the actual bolts here. If we were to take those bolts into the inside, that would actually make our operation even better. If you think about it, you know, we bring those bolts towards the center of the door, all of a sudden our ability to create a ton of leverage to be able to destroy that metal is even greater. So something to think about, especially when you start looking at where the placement of your bolts are. Okay, door number 10. So We've talked a lot about different types of myth busters here. This is another myth buster, and Lynch has talked about it a little bit as far as what we look at with our mortise style cylinders. But this is a perfect example of a door upon first glance that would appear very intimidating. We've got the door on the left with the cage. We've got the door on the right with fabricated bars in place. To the average person, especially somebody whose plan A this whole time is to take the glass, this would really scramble their eggs. But if we've got the ability to go through the lock, whether that's with a Rex tool or some sort of a tool or whatever you use at your department, it really opens up a lot of opportunities for us. So with these aluminum style storefront doors, really, if you know how to get through this through the lock, it's a very quick operation. Our weak point is that mortise lock. And we're going to show a demonstration of a time trial of what our plan A, B, and C are. So our plan A is almost always going to be through the lock. There are certain scenarios where we might not be able to do that. Our plan B would be cutting the latch, and our plan C will be breaking the glass. And you'll see why our plan C is breaking the glass in just a moment. So removes the cylinder, goes up, left, right, has a set of modified channel locks, goes right in, goes towards the door, doors open, matter of 30 seconds or less. If for some reason that's not an option, cutting the latch is also an option. So the first person's gonna get their Halligan set. Sometimes it's a little harder to get that Halligan in there, especially if you have a tight seam. You're just opening it up enough for the saw person to come in, cut that latch all the way through, and now you still have an operable door. Your flow path is still controlled. You have something that you can shut and open the entire time. A little bit more of a lengthy operation in comparison to simply just going through the lock, but sometimes this is the only option that you have. Our saws are a little bit more powerful nowadays. We have some better blades, so this might be even a little bit quicker nowadays. There you go. Cuts the entire dead latch there, goes all the way through that stamped steel, and then now, like I said, you have a door that's controlled. Plan C, breaking the glass, is still an option, but it's low on the list. So one of the things you're going to notice here is breaking the glass itself. You know, I've just created marbles. My flow path is open. A lot of times these secondary or ancillary bars that people put in, not super difficult to get through. So he's pretty easily just hitting these out of the way. The hardest part is going to be this aluminum stock handle. I've personally done this on aluminum style storefront doors, and it is miserable. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. It's really hard to get through these by just hitting it. Most of the time, you're going to have to call for a saw. So if you don't have a saw readily available and that aluminum stock handle is in the way, you've created marbles, your flow path is disturbed, and then all of a sudden you've got this bar that's cutting your door in half. So your idea of going through something quickly, creating a path for people to get hosed through or start searching through is significantly diminished until you can get a saw in here to get that stock handle out of the way. If you ever have the opportunity to do this on a training aluminum style storefront door, I encourage you to take the glass and try to get that stock handle out of the way. It's a lot harder than it looks.
It was fun watching that guy suffer trying to beat all those bars in, though.
Yes. So 1 minute, 25 seconds, you know, not super long amount of time, but all the things I just talked about, all those considerations of why it's not a great idea. That's why we really try to aim for going through the lock first, cutting the latch second, and then way down on the line, breaking the glass.
All right. So this is a portion of our presentation that normally we, you know, in person, it's pretty easy because we just call on people and say, hey, size up this door. So I'm going to ask for some volunteers out there to step up and to do some door size ups. And basically what John and I have been doing through the first hour of this presentation, if you guys will just pop on here and size up the door and tell me, you know, big picture to small picture, tell me what you see and tell me what your plan A is, plan B is, and whatnot to be able to get in the door. And if you would too, since you know, obviously, like we can't see you, I can't see you, but if you would just when you chime in or unmute or whatever it is, if you guys would just let us know where you're from, what department you're from, and who you are. So who wants to do the first one? Anybody out there? The weird part is we'll sit there and just stare back at you for a while, you know? My record is like, I'll just sit there for like 5 minutes. Wait.
Maybe we should check in with
Chat.
yeah,
All right.
make sure that it's even a
Yeah, so
possibility.
chat's open. Just anybody say pick me in chat, and we can allow you to talk. We'll hit the button, and you can even talk. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, whoever wants to do this, do one here. We'll put the first one up there so you can take a look at it. If not, if it's going to be too hard, John and I can kind of run through these here a little bit, but. No brave souls tonight?
You should send a message to all panelists.
Yeah.
Step up. All right, well, then I guess I'll do it as if I didn't know this door already. And for the next one, maybe, you know, we'll have some people waiting in line. Okay, so door number 11, we've got an Army surplus store. It's a masonry building. We know that we have an outward swinging door because we can see the hinges themselves. We've got a metal frame, metal jamb, door type, metal door. Primary lock, again, is going to be that key and knob lock that we see there. And our secondary locks, we've got a mirroring bolt pattern just above the key and knob lock. We've got some sort of slide bolt or hasp in the center of the door. And this is actually a good door to talk about because we really haven't talked about what a hasp looks like in comparison to a slide bolt. So if you think about this door, you know, it's a double door. So it's both of them should be able to open simultaneously. So you wouldn't be able to just use a slide bolt, you know, to make that work. So anytime I see a double door and I see bolts right towards the edge of the door itself, I think to myself, this is probably a hasp with some sort of padlock on it. And then up at the very top, on the top left-hand side of this door, you see a couple bolts up there. If those bolts were vertical, I might be thinking a slide bolt. Another thing these might just be is a closer. So it kind of just depends on the building itself and how old the door is, but this could very well be a closer as well. Okay, we look at the inside of this door. We pretty much have exactly what we anticipated. We've got a key and knob lock there. We've got our drop bar with our L-style brackets, and these are pretty beefy brackets. Looks like a pretty stout bar as well. We've got, as I mentioned before, some form of hasp. This actually isn't as much of a hasp as it is a fabricated bracket, and they've simply just put what am I trying to say, padlock into it. So again, you know, we talk about how we're going to attack this. We're still going to go conventional, still going to start with my adds. I'll start nearest that key and knob lock. I'll start to feel that pressure. Again, that Halligan is going to show us the weak point of this door. So we don't have a ton of throw over the top of the jamb itself. So that could potentially be a weak point for us. We've only got one drop bar in play. If I were to attack the bolts on this, if that was indicated for me, I would be attacking nearest that key and knob lock there. So on the primary door, I would start from there. I might be able to just get that one bracket out of play like we saw in that previous video, and then go right back into attacking it conventional.
Other thing I want to point out on this is like when John talked about before with double doors, if you look at the seam of that door where those two doors come together, you know, this, you can see there's a stop that has been zip screwed on the back side of that secondary door. So in essence, if I go up and I can't determine which is my primary door or my secondary door, or I just don't pay attention and I choose wrong, right? I put my tool on that and I start to pry on that secondary door. That primary door sits on top of that secondary door. And so I would just be prying and bowing out the seam of that door from top to bottom, even though it's probably only sits on there about 1/2 inch to 1 inch, right? If I do that and I go up to the door, I look at it and I go, man, I don't know which one is the primary door, because there's occasionally you'll come across a commercial building where it's just, it's flat on both sides. There's nothing that indicates. So if that's the case, you put your tool on that door, you start to pry on it. If the whole thing bows out at you, flip your tool around and attack the other door. And it makes it pretty simple and easy. Like John talked about before, we had the opportunity to go to we got a few acquired structures, and we were able to recreate every door we have in this presentation. And we obviously didn't put each one of them in the video, but this is a real good example of how we would attack this door, these double doors, right? Drop the volume just a little bit there. So we go up, I put my hand on it, try before you pry, right? You're welcome, Ifsta. So we go after the push bar that's in there, the panic bar. We're going to defeat that first. Really doesn't take a lot to defeat it. Really, one of the strongest things about this door was the door itself. One of the strongest things about the setup was this door itself. These were really incredibly stout doors. So went after it. I go to pull on it, and man, it's tight. So if you got 2 guys standing right there, both of you grab that and pull on that, kind of double your strength there. And you can see we got a little bit more gap, but not really enough, right? So I know we defeated the primary lock. So I'm going to go after the top bolt on my primary door, the top bolt closest to the seam of that door, right? I go after that, and I want to fail that top bolt first, because if I fail, I got the top and the bottom bolt. If I fail that top bolt, that bracket will start to kind of fall in just a little bit. And I go to the top of the top bolt, I go to the top of the bottom bolt, and then I'm going to attack both bolts right in the middle of it. And like we talked about before, we say, there's a little awkward grunt by me right there. We always talk about driving the carriage bolts through the door, and really, that's not necessarily what we're actually doing. What we're really doing is we're destroying and defeating the metal around that door, like basically boring a hole around that door, so it defeats the strength of that bracket. And you can tell here, a little bit difficult, but we've gotten a pretty good gap in between that door. Enough so to where I can see that, that drop bar is still in place. Oftentimes, if you put a cheater bar in here, you marry a roof hook and a Halligan, or you scissor 2 Halligans together, that provides enough leverage to be able to defeat that, right? In this case, we get a little bit more gap, enough so where we can capture our progress there. And I put the axe in there. If I were you, I would put it down on the butt of the axe on the ground, because you see when I open up this door here, it falls down, but it just luckily falls into place. All I'm doing is capturing that daylight there, pulling back pressure on that so he can work that drop bar up and out of place. Once he does, he knocks that up, gets it up and out of place. We can tell the padlock and hasp is still locking that door. If you've got a running saw there, just zip the shackles. It's 3 seconds is what it took us to gain access to it. If not, or your saw won't start, grab the Halligan, the forks of Halligan on the shackles, twist it, put some torsional stress around it, and if that doesn't work, drive them right off, just like we see right here, and we're inside this door. Pretty quick, pretty simple operation, right? All right, I don't know if we're gonna have any takers out there, but does anybody want to do door number 12? It's a marijuana shop, and it's just a little enticement to do door number 12. We'll give you a free sample of Colorado weed if we'll mail it to you. There's nothing wrong with mailing marijuana. I'm sure it's probably not a crime. Anybody want to chime in? I'm guessing no. So
There was some.
oh, there was somebody
let's
chime
see,
in.
I don't know.
Who was it?
It's up at the top here, but I can't select it.
I don't-
What's it say on there?
I don't know. I don't know how to do this.
Go back to the chat.
Chat.
I don't think they're, let's see here.
Oh, maybe not. Chat 1. So, oh. All right, we'll run through this one here. So I look at this one. I've got a medical marijuana facility. It's a masonry building. Metal frame, metal jam, outward swinging metal door. I look. I've got my key and knob lock. That's my primary lock. My secondary locks, I start to look for those. And if I look high on the lock side and low on the lock side, I can see I've got a couple of slide bolts, right? And then I look in the middle of this door right here, and I can see I've got a pretty big kind of homemade latch guard that is with the 2 carriage bolts that are kind of mounted right in the middle of it. And it's a pretty tall latch guard and it's a pretty wide latch guard, right? And then if I look across that door towards the hinge side, I've got a couple carriage bolts, similar pattern, but they're just in a little skinny little metal plate behind it. So right away, I look at this and I think I've got a key and knob lock. I've got 2 slide bolts on the lock side, high and low, and then I've got a drop bar in the middle. The unique thing about this and why we want to start to recognize stuff almost instantaneously is that when I look at this carriage bolt pattern, I know that I'm not going to be able to drive the carriage bolts through like we just watched in that video. I've got that metal plate behind it, so I'm going to need a saw to be able to get behind these quickly and efficiently. And the latch guard, the homemade latch guard on the left, because it's so tall and because it's wide, I don't have the depth of my saw to be able to plunge cut behind it. This is one where I'm going to have to shave the bolt heads off, take the pike of the Halligan, and then drive it through to defeat that bracket. On the other side, on the hinge side, that little skinny one, I can use where that plate comes against the door there as a score and just dive my saw in at a 45-degree angle, and I cut the bolts, the shaft of the bolts in half in the middle of that door, right? And I render that bracket to be pretty ineffective. So I look at the back side of this here, and again, we've got medical marijuana facility, and I've got a key and knob lock, a deadbolt. I've got slide bolts like I saw, and I've got a drop bar. So I knew exactly what I was up against, and I had that plan A, plan B to be able to overcome it. The unique thing about this is one of the reasons why I look at, especially with outward swinging commercial doors with drop bars, we've had a lot of luck with failing those by going conventional on it and then grabbing grabbing a Halligan and marrying it together, 2 Halligans together, or a Halligan and a roof hook, and extending our leverage to try and defeat that. We've had a lot of luck with being able to get enough gap between the door and the frame to reach in and knock that drop bar up and out of place. But if you look at this one, we won't be able to do that here because we've got a fully enclosed mount, right, on one side. And then on the other side, on the hinge side there, the left side of this, we've got a open mount, but it's got a pin through it that they pin that drop bar into place. So on this, I'm going to have to completely defeat that bracket in order to gain access inside. I rarely, if ever, and I can't think of a time that I've had an open mount that wasn't pinned and it was just an open, L bracket or U bracket mount where I haven't defeated the entire door and that entire system by defeating that lock side. I've never had to go to the hinge side. That's not true with closed mounts. There's been a couple times where we've had to move over to that hinge side and defeat that as well, just because that drop bar is in place and it's holding, right? So with closed mounts, they add a little bit of degree of difficulty to it, and right away I'm going to have to defeat the entire thing.
All right, door number 13. We've got a Mexican restaurant, masonry building. We have a metal frame, metal door, outward swinging. And when we look at this door, the picture on this one's actually not great, just because it's a brown door with brown carriage bolts. So you're probably don't have a great view of this on your computer, but our primary lock is going to be that key and knob lock. Right away, I see that I have a latch guard, and then it's very subtle and faint, but you can see that we do have 2 sets of carriage bolts on the left-hand side or the primary door. Ooh, that's bright.
Is that too bright?
No, I think it's good. On the primary door, we've got bolts that are pretty well spread apart. On the right-hand or non-primary door, I should say, we've got bolts that are close together. Regardless, I still see mirroring bolt patterns. So in the back of my mind, I would be thinking to myself, I have some sort of drop bar. Okay, and this is exactly what we're looking at. So whoever put this together, very poor craftsmanship. So we've got our key and knob lock like we talked about. We've got our 2 brackets there. The way that these are mounted, even though the carriage bolts themselves were kind of offset, this is pretty symmetrical. So we've got a standard drop bar. You'll see that we call this the plunge cut mythbusters. So one of the things that is a reoccurring theme throughout the fire service, both in textbooks and then also just in discussion, is the idea of taking our saw blade and simply just going right through the center of the door and cutting the bar on the backhand side. This is a good example of why that wouldn't work. If you look at the way that this bar is positioned, the bar is actually positioned on the wall on the other side. So the space in between the door and the bar itself is so significant. If you were to put a saw blade through here, more than likely you wouldn't even touch the bar itself. So this is why we really harp on the idea of, first of all, going conventional, using our tools, finding the weakness of the door, but then also using your saw in a manner that's actually going to be effective. And this is an example of that. So this saw blade goes all the way through, doesn't even come close to touching the bar because the bar is on the other side of the wall. So you got somebody on the Q&A. Yeah.
Oh, bolt cutters too.
We have a question here, so give us 1 second. We got a Q&A question that came up a little bit after the fact. So in reference to the bolt cutter question in the group chat, I was referencing the video with the option of A, B, or C, break the glass with metal bar across the door. Can they be cut with bolt cutters? So is that the metal bars?
I'm thinking the metal bars that go across can you cut them with bolt cutters, right? I think Victoria asked that question. So chime in if you ask that question. You can just ask it to the group, or I think that's what you're referencing to.
Cutting the bars themselves. So like the manufactured bars that are added on the aluminum style storefront doors. I see you, Victoria. If you want to unmute.
All right, I just added Victoria. She should be able to talk.
All right.
Victoria, you there? No, like she jumped off.
Okay.
Nope, here she is. Victoria?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
There you are.
Yes.
Yeah, I was referring to the bars that, like, once you break the glass and use the bolt cutters, or are they too hard to cut with bolt cutters?
So, I mean, first of all, the aluminum stock handle, you definitely wouldn't be able to cut with bolt cutters. It's just too stout. There is potential that you, I guess, could cut some stuff that's manufactured after the fact. But I guess my thought process with that would be, when we go up to aluminum style storefront door on a structure fire, the tools I'd be bringing with me are at a minimum irons, and then I would have my Rex tool with us. Very rarely would I think to bring bolt cutters with me. So it's not only a matter of the bolt cutters probably not doing the job, especially for the stock handle, but also a matter of just not having those tools readily accessible. So that would be really low down on my priority list. And I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, it's same. Yeah. Thank you for asking a question. Thanks for chiming in.
Victoria, do you want to do the next door since you're already on the chat?
I can try my best.
You should do it.
Awesome.
Real quick, let's just play this video and then you can do the next door. So this is an example of what we were just talking about. They're going to go ahead and set the ads in there, goes to full depth, feels the resistance of the door. So this is an example of how to defeat a door similar to what we just looked at. And what this is an example of is adding leverage. So we've talked about it a few times of adding leverage or using a cheater bar. This is a good example of using that near roof hook. So even though we have a little bit of an obstruction with that left side wall, being able to place this near roof hook into operation adds an additional 6 foot of leverage. And with a 2x4, like we just saw in the previous picture, you can completely splinter and shatter these 2x4s if you get enough leverage in there. So using this cheater bar as an early option, as opposed to going through the effort of actually taking the carriage bolts, is a really good option, especially if the person who gets the daylight to be able to see the bar can recognize that it's a wood bar, a 2x4 or something similar. This is an awesome option to be able to fail that. So you can see just the crushing force that we have simply by adding that 6 foot near roof hook. And they're already starting to fail the bracket itself. You can see that bracket start to bend over, even though it's fairly stout. But what ultimately ends up failing is the bar. And again, this goes back to what we talked about before. The tools that you use will expose the weak point. In this case, the weak point is the fact that we have a 2x4 that's spread out over 8+ feet. All right, Victoria, you're up.
All right, let's see what we got here. It looks like a masonry structure, outward swinging door, metal door, and jamb. I have a, let's see, I'm not sure what I know there's see, we got something up top. And I don't know if there's a latch maybe at the top, but the bolts are sitting sideways, so I'm not really sure what that could be unless they're separated. I don't know that it's a bar going all the way across.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't see a deadbolt. That's the
Yep.
best I got.
Okay. Perfect job. So you talked about the masonry building. It is an outward swinging door, metal frame. I don't know if you can see it very well, but there's a key and knob block, and then below that key and knob block, there's another set of mirroring bolt patterns there.
Oh yeah, I see that. Yep.
Yep. So, and then up at the very top, you can see there's basically 4 holes. And what that is, just looking at it, more than likely that was a closer. That was like an automatic closer that they just removed after the fact, just simply because of the placement and the size of the bolt holes themselves. So in essence, we have exactly what you talked about. You've got your key and knob block. You have mirroring bolt patterns up top, which would make me think that we more than likely have some sort of drop bar there. We've got those mirroring bolt patterns down low that are a little harder to see. Again, probably some sort of drop bar. And then this is a little harder to see too, but we also have a homemade latch guard. So up until this point, you know, when we've talked about these latch guards, we've talked about something that's very small in nature, you know, something that's less than a foot in height. That goes right next to the key and knob block. In this case, whoever fabricated this basically took some metal and ran it up the entire door and tack welded it in place as a latch guard, so somebody couldn't put some sort of pry tool like a crowbar in place and get this door open. Not necessarily a huge deal for us. For a lot of these, we can remove them, especially if they didn't do a great job of welding them, and if we have a really chintzy skin of the door. But our plan of attack is still the same. So I'm probably going to have to remove some real estate of this latch guard to begin to work, but I'm going to try to get as close to this key and knob lock as I can, get my tool in, start feeling the resistance of the door, and then develop a game plan. And this is what we're looking at on the back side of the door. So we've got our key and knob lock like we talked about. It looks like they probably had some sort of bar in place before, because you can see they put sheets of metal that they've welded in place on the door where his hand is. We don't really have anything present down low, so more than likely that's the bolt pattern we're looking at on the outside. It was probably a bar there before they removed it. This is a good example of us still going conventional, because you know, if that top bar weren't in place and we were seeing these mirroring bolt patterns, there's a possibility the drop bar is not even there. The drop bar up at the top, pretty stout, pretty beefy. With that being said, that's really the only thing that's preventing us from getting in there, and it's still an L bracket style mount. So more than likely, what I think would probably happen is we get that little bit of that latch guard out of play, whether we remove it entirely or we cut a section out, depending on how stout it is. We get our tool in there, we create enough daylight, and again, take my New York roof hook, hit that drop bar out of play. This is an example of us removing the skin. So this can be pretty easily accomplished on a lot of these latch guards with just using your hand tools. This all goes back to that leverage we can create with that 30-inch bar. You can create a lot of crushing damage with just using the bar itself. So get the latch guard out of play, and then all of a sudden we're looking at a door that's similar to everything else we've looked at so far. We don't have to go super in depth with this. You get the idea. Manual labor, a lot of grunting, eventually gets removed. And this is an example of one similar that we just looked at. So this is top to bottom, tack welded just like we saw in the last door. But again, something that can be removed with hand tools. So get that out of play, whether that means taking the entire latch guard out of play or just removing enough of the section that you can begin working towards your primary lock. And you can hear him saying, get the saw ready. So that's another option too. You know, if you're trying to do this manually and it's just not working, you did a good job of getting that out of the way. But if you've got a saw readily available, you still have work to do on the back side of that door. So use the tools available to you. And this is honestly probably a little bit more than he would actually do in real life, just because the saw's there and running. But it just demonstrates the fact that a lot of this can be done with simply just using your hand tools. And once he clears this entire latch guard out of the way, we operate with this door as we would any other door. Set your ads in there, begin feeling the resistance. If I can create enough of space to get a drop bar out of the place, I might do that, or I might begin attacking the carriage bolts themselves if that's an option. Okay, fast forward through that. Okay, do we have anybody? Oh, let's move to the next one. We have anybody out in the chat that wants to try this one? I'll give it like maybe a minute or so, or maybe even less, probably less than a minute.
All right.
30 seconds. If not, I'll act like I don't know and I'll do it
Pop
again.
into the Q&A, not the Q&A, pop into the chat and just say, hey, I'd like to do this one. And I think they can add you. So Joe can add you. If that's right, Joe, I don't know.
Yep, that's right.
Cool.
All right, well, man, what could we possibly have at door 15? We've got a pawn shop. It's wood frame, it's stucco. We've got a outward swinging door. My primary door is on the left-hand side. I've got a key and knob lock. Again, I've got a latch guard, and this door is a little bit weird because nothing's really standing out to me, right? I have the key and knob lock that's readily visible. I also have a little bit of a piece of metal there that looks like that was probably some sort of deadbolt that they filled with a plate. Going back to what we talked about before, you know, knowing your district, knowing that there's valuables on the other side. If I saw something like this and I didn't have any apparent bolt patterns or anything like that, right away I'd be thinking this has to be more fortified than what I'm looking at. It can't simply just be a key and knob lock. Doesn't change my order of operations as far as still going conventional, but I wouldn't be surprised to see some level of resistance once I get my tool in here. And as I talked about, that's exactly what we're looking at. So while we may be dealing with only a key and knob lock on the outside, just on the other side of the door, we're dealing with a homemade gate that's secured by multiple padlocks and a deadbolt. So this talks about needing to try multiple plans. First of all, the reason it mentions that is if you look at the hinges themselves, they're using like really cheap gate hinges that you would get at Lowe's for like $5. So, you know, if you might give this a hard shake and this whole thing would come tumbling down. So the first thing I probably do is come up to this gate, give it a hard shake and feel where that resistance is. After I've done that, you know, I could potentially try to go conventional on this, but I have multiple padlocks. What this really demonstrates is looking at your door and thinking about how it's going to fail, especially when I start bringing saws into play. So if I try to just go vertically and rip this entire thing, I'm going to be spending a lot of time attacking this door. But if I take a closer look at how this door is assembled and how very similar gates are assembled, I can really just take the entire lock assembly out of play with a few good cuts, well-placed cuts, and I've saved myself a lot of time. So for example, on something like this, I just want to get that deadbolt out of play. So I might cut high here, cut off to the side there, cut down low, and then all of a sudden I've taken the entire lock assembly out that's holding everything in play, and I can operate the gate itself. Same would apply for something like this. So if I go high here, I go right next to the lock there, and I go down low, all of a sudden I've made 3 quick cuts and I've got an operable gate and the lock is out of the way. So the same concept would apply there.
All right, door number 16. We got a few doors left that we'll get through. And then if anybody's got any questions, but we look at this is a furniture warehouse. You know, and it kind of goes back to what John was saying earlier. You got to have to know your district, know the occupancy, and know the people, and know the area. This isn't an area where there's, you know, it's a crime-ridden area of our city where I look at this backside of this building here, and you can see it's already been broken into where the key and knob lock used to be. There's a push plate that looks like it's over where the where the deadbolt got blown open. There's a push plate where the key and knob lock used to be. And then if you look down there, I've got that carriage bolt pattern. I got some pretty big carriage bolts with pretty big washers behind them, right? And if you look at it, it's offset just a little bit, right? It's doesn't look flush, doesn't look level. So when I see that, you know, this is one of those ones where craftsmanship and has to come into your expectations. When I look at this, do you think that a guy that doesn't care that somebody came by with a sledgehammer and blew his deadbolt through, He didn't even bother to cover that up. I just put a push plate on the outside of his key and knob lock. Do I really think that, like, you know, this offset bolt pattern is like some, really difficult or integral lock, or do I think it's probably just a drop bar and this guy mounted this drop bar and didn't bother to put a level on it and make sure it's plumb and it's flush? That's probably what I'm going to go with. I'm going to think, yeah, this is just a drop bar right off the bat. And that's how I'm going to attack the door. Either way, I'm going to go after it with my irons. And if we look at the back side of this, you know, we got a pretty big drop bar. We've got a two 2x4s and a kind of a metal bar, a steel tube that goes through that drop bar. That's a pretty stout setup in terms of drop bars. It's got a lot of surface area on either side of that door, right, in that frame. So that's a pretty good drop bar setup. The problem is that, like we've said all night, the Halligan exposes the weakest link. So when I look at the weakest link here, it's going to be these big, huge U brackets that he mounted on the back side of this door. And really what ended up happening is I went up to him, just grabbed it and just pulled on it, and it bent that bracket all the way down. So we recreated this door as well. And if we look at the back side of this whole video right here from start to finish, when they start until they get the door open, is 12 seconds. You can tell they get it open. They pull so hard on it, anticipating it's going to be difficult, that the door slams back shut. You can see that if you watch this again, watch that bracket on the lock side, the left side, you watch it just bend completely over. Easy and simple. Again, this goes back to why we try our irons first. That's our plan A, because it gets us through most of the doors that we're going to come across. Door number 17 here. We put this in there one more time as a reminder that I look at this, and this is a very well fortified door. This is a very well fortified building. It's a liquor store, masonry block construction. Really, this door is this is probably one of the more heavily fortified fronts of strip malls that we're going to find. Steel mesh, steel bars through the door, through the windows. This prevents the smash and grab criminal from coming up and throwing a brick through the window, going inside, grabbing, you know, clearing out the cash register, grabbing some cigarettes and some booze, and having themselves a nice little weekend. But what it doesn't prevent is us as firefighters getting through this. The only impediment that we have to getting in this building is directly below that handle is I've got that little mortise cylinder. It's 15 seconds. I open up this door, I gain access to it. I have control of that door to control the airflow into the building. Makes it simple and easy, right? And the very last door that we're going to look at here, door number 18. There's a couple lessons to be learned in this. If I look at this door here, it's, you know, big picture to small picture, wood frame, stucco building. It's the end unit of a strip mall. I've got a deadbolt as my primary lock, and then I've got two slide bolts, high and low, above that deadbolt, and then I've got 3 drop bars, and each drop bar's got a metal plate, a little skinny metal plate in the holding those or behind those bolts, right? So I look at this, and this looks to be like, if all this stuff is in place, this is going to be a pretty stout door, pretty stout operation. I already know I'm starting to formulate my plan A, plan B, plan C. I try my irons first, because I always try my irons first, and then I find the resistance. And if that stuff's in place, then I know that I'm not going to be able to drive those through with my Halligan, those bolts. I'm going to need a saw to be able to attack those. So when we look at the back side of this door here, kind of what I expected. This is a pretty bomber door. It's pretty bomb proof, right? Deadbolt. I've got 2 slide bolts there. I've got the drop bar in the middle, which is a little bit unusual that you see a couple different types of drop bars on the same door. This one wraps the center of that door. So this is where I'm certain the plunge cut myth came from. You can dive that saw into that middle of that door and cut it in half on this, but from the outside of this door, there's 0 indication. And if that drop bar is pinned on the lock side, I'm still going to have to defeat that bracket on the other side, right? Which this drop bar is pinned on that lock side there, right? If I look at the top red drop bar, the top and the bottom drop bars, both red drop bars, they're identical. So we look at the top one. In the frame, that drop bar sits into a bracket that's welded onto that frame. On the hinge side, you can see that little baseball bat that's kind of hanging down on the right side of that hinge. On the hinge side, that's a pin that sits into that, goes through the bar into the frame of that door. So this is a very stout and a very, very, very difficult door. It's gonna be pretty difficult for us to get through, right? A lot of labor, a lot of work to get through it. When we went and I found this door, we walked around the outside of the building. I think one of the best things you can do is you go out in your district, you do district familiarization, you go to these different buildings, go to the outside of the building first and start to size up stuff from the outside first. So it'll give you a really good indication of kind of give you, it's almost door size up practice in your own district, right? Get you an idea and then go inside and take a look at it. So when we did, we had our probationary firefighter, he sized up the door for us. Then we went inside and I talked to the guy, just said, hey, can we take a look at the back door? It's always weird when you ask somebody if I can take a look at your back door, right? But go in, can I take a look at your back door? He says, yeah, go ahead. None of the drop bars were in place, right? There was nothing that was sitting there and that was in place. It was just the deadbolt that was thrown that was locking the door. So I said, hey, put the drop bars in place so like you lock it up at night. And he said, well, that's how I do lock it up at night, is just with that deadbolt. And we kind of had this back and forth because I kind of thought like he thinks I'm code enforcement type thing. And after about 5 minutes of this back and forth, he said, take a look around. If you can find them, great. I moved in here a couple months ago and I haven't seen them, right? So we start looking around and lo and behold, behind a bunch of boxes with a bunch of dust on top of it, our new kid found these drop bars, right? So this guy was telling the truth. At night, the only thing locking this door was that deadbolt right there, right? So we're talking about a 30-second force and we're inside this door, we gain access to it, right? The other point that I think of is now that we showed him where all of his stuff is, he probably locks it up every night, right? So now this door is going to be locked up. It is going to be in place. So sometimes forcible entry isn't always about gaining immediate access to that door right then. The term softening the building is something that's pretty widespread now in the fire service. And I can tell you, you think about your own organization, apply this to your own department. But like in our department, if we're the second truck company to a strip mall fire, or maybe even the first truck company, depending on the scenario, we're going to have at least a couple guys that go to the backside of the building and start to soften and start to attack these doors, just for the purpose of, I can tell you right now, John and I work together in the same firehouse on the same shift. We can drive you to strip malls in our district and commercial buildings in our district where there's a business being operated out of the front, and in the backside of it, there's civilians who have set up a house. They've set up a residence. So we always account for, I think there's going to be civilians that are inside this building. So we have to account for the search of them and the rescue of them. Even if there aren't civilians inside there, we're putting firefighters inside the building. So I want to make sure that should we have a mayday, should we have a firefighter get lost, should we find a civilian inside, I'm not taking time at the beginning of this incident or at that time when we do have a mayday, we do find a civilian. I'm not taking that time to try and force open this door. We recreated this door and it took us about 3.5, 4 minutes to get through. And I learned some lessons along the way that would have shaved probably a minute off of that, right? But if I think about that in terms of time somebody's inside of a building, I would much rather take the time at the beginning of the incident to force open this door, take that 3 minutes, gain access to that building so we can make the door openable, which means we just can push it open or we can pull it open, however the door works, and I can get to that civilian or I can get to that firefighter right away. So that will conclude the presentation tonight. I appreciate everybody who participated. Appreciate again the Fire Nuggets guys from opening up. If anybody has any questions, John and I will kind of hang out here for a second. And thank you to Victoria for stepping up and doing Victoria. You're doing a good job, so we appreciate it. Does anybody have any questions or comments or anything? If you want, you can obviously contact us on Facebook. John and I are both on Facebook, unfortunately. Or you can email ironsandladders@hotmail.com or ironsandladdersbilling@yahoo.com. and we'll answer your questions. So.
And while we're waiting for any questions to come in, I would just add that, first of all, we have a ton of different videos on YouTube that take this to a deeper level. So us trying to condense this into a 2-hour class, we do the best that we can. But at the same time, if you would like to see these videos or some of these doors in greater depth, they're on YouTube on the Under the Irons and Ladders page. And then also, one of the things that we do on a shift by shift basis is we go out into our own district and we do the same exact practices that we're doing here. So I would definitely encourage you to take the system of big picture to small picture and anticipating how a door would open, do it in your own district, ask the business owner if you can see the backside of the door and see if you're right. And you do this enough times, it's pretty amazing to be able to see how effective this system is, because you can walk up to a door you've never seen before, and then all of a sudden you can anticipate what's on the backside. Looks like we do have somebody on the Q&A.
Q&A.
No.
You see that, Brian?
Okay, yeah. Can you review again how you know an outside lock indicates panic hardware inside? Yeah, so let me, I'm just gonna go all the way back to this, to this slide, go all the way back through it to the very beginning here. Oh, perfect. So we look at this and we look at, and this question comes in and says, can you review again how you know an outside lock indicates panic hardware on the inside? So one of the things that we found with you know, really that's kind of throughout the United States is if we see like these 3 locks right here, the top 2 and the bottom quarter turn handle down there, the bottom left part of the screen, the consistency, the one common denominator is that keyway or the cylinder where you put the key in from the outside, it's inset in a handle. So when we see a lock cylinder that's inset in a handle, very often it indicates to us, like almost every time, it indicates to us that we've got a panic bar on the other side of it. So I hope that answers your question.
Anybody else have any other questions for us before we wrap up?
We got another question from Alex. He asked, conventional force for Trident locks.
Tell me what, I'm not sure the nomenclature, but Trident lock.
Those are the ones that go down.
Oh,
So
up and down and out. Yeah, okay, yeah. I haven't had the opportunity to actually force one. So like we said at the very beginning, you know, I'm not going to tell you, here's how I would do it. I guess the way I look at it is, you know, again, try conventional forcible entry first. See if you can't fail it on that side. There's a lot of locks out there, like the Securitech lock system. I've seen those that's got goes in. I want throws a bolt or a pin on the lock side and the hinge side, and then goes up and down as well. And I look at how far they throw it into the frame, and it's usually not that far. So I would just put my tool on it, go after it, and try and gain access to it. We had a fire probably a month ago or so where we had a slide bolt that was actually on the back side of it, and it was going up into the header of the door from the back side. So the irons guy grabbed the door from the top and just forced it from the top. A little bit more time consuming and a little bit awkward, you know, kind of just because anytime you're forcing a door above your head or below your knees, it just makes it a little bit more awkward. But being able to go right to the resistance, even if you have to go above or below that lock and attack it, that's probably what my game plan would be. I unfortunately have not had the opportunity to attack one in real life, though.
I'll just add to that, you know, I haven't either, but what I will say is I would go conventional like he's talking about if I had that level of resistance that I would anticipate from a Trident lock, because I mean, they are pretty stout. I would try to add that leverage, but at that point, you know, your ability to fail those like you would a traditional drop bar is kind of out the window. So any type of building that has a Trident lock more than likely has another path of egress as well. So there is kind of a breakover point where, you know, you might end up trying some of these things, going conventional, adding leverage, and then it's just not a possibility, and you look for another means of egress. Any other questions out there?
I do here. Yeah, thanks, Alex. Thanks for asking that question, and appreciate you chiming in. One thing I forgot to mention before is I will post the YouTube channel, the Irons and Ladders YouTube channel that has all the videos of our door forces and much more in depth than we put in the video or in the presentation tonight. I'll post that on the Irons and Ladders Facebook page tonight, and then repost it on my own personal page. And then I'm sure if you guys want to get to that, but feel free to send us a message directly on Facebook or on Irons and Ladders email. But if we don't have any more questions, I don't think we do.
We're right at 7 o'clock. So
We're right at
perfect
7.
timing.
Yeah, right at 7 o'clock. So again, appreciate it. Joe, do you have anything?
No, thank you guys. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, John, for your time. Thanks for everybody tuning in. Great to have Irons and Ladder as usual. And those will be doing a virtual truck next series. Next segment is next October 27th with Julio Ramos. So tune in to that. There's still tickets on demand available. Register at firenuggets.com. That's all I got. Thank you again for the support, and we'll catch you brothers later.
All right.
Thank you
See
very
y'all.
much. See ya.
All right.